Will South Carolina be a turning point or an asterisk? This time on Poll Hub, Bernie Sanders won the most votes in Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada, the first three contests, making him the rather undisputed frontrunner heading into the South Carolina primary on Leap Day, February 29th. But with Joe Biden leading in most South Carolina polls, will Sanders remain the king of the hill if he doesn't win on Saturday? And what about that food fight in Charleston? It was a debate. Is that going to make a difference? We've got a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
So 3 down and a whole lot to go, but South Carolina is the fourth of the first 4 when we talk about the getting started in the Democratic or Republican kind of primary process, the presidential selection process. This has been an unusual year. No candidate has ever won the popular vote in the first 3 contests. And Bernie Sanders has done that. But right now, as we sit here 2 days before the primary in South Carolina, it looks like Joe Biden might actually be able to trip him up.
Well, it's sort of an unusual situation because, we always talk about firewalls in primaries, and such and such is going to be a firewall, and very often the firewalls end up kind of crashing and smoking and burning along the way. And this time,
because the momentum from the previous primaries kind of builds and creates a new front runner.
Yeah, and I think there was some of that thinking going on when we saw, that the African-American vote was narrowing for Biden in terms of his advantage. And South Carolina, of course, has the big African-American vote. And when that started to get close, then people say, well, here goes again. But right now he's had some decent debate performances, and I think he's presented himself. Biden has, and I think the firewall may hold for him, and then he's off the canvas, and then we'll have a whole different situation coming on Super Tuesday.
So there's a lot of polls. We talk about polls here because we're a polling podcast. There have been a lot of polls about South Carolina. One of them is ours, but there's also these 2 debates that have kind of been stuck in the middle. There was the Nevada debate, and then there's the South Carolina debate. What do we know about what the polls are telling us at this point?
Well, we also know that when things happen in the real world between polls, that very often we do see differences, and they affect the polls and the race itself. So debates matter.
Are you telling me, Barb, that the campaigns don't stop, let us poll, and then continue? No, that's not nice of them.
As we know, election polling and primary polling is always a moving target. Mm-hmm. I know you're fond of your snapshot theory, Lee, that it's a moment in time. But yes, we actually polled prior to both Nevada, the Nevada caucus, and also the South Carolina debate, which both were pretty interesting and fiery. So at that point, we had Biden up by 4 points over Sanders.
Technically within the margin of error, so at best it was a narrow lead.
It was an edge, and you mentioned the African American vote. That last time in 2016 for the Democrats was over 60% of the primary vote, and there is the expectation that it may be close to that. There is only a Democratic primary in South Carolina this time. Last time there was both a Democrat and Republican primary. And why that's important is because in South Carolina, everybody can vote. It's an open primary. So you don't have to be registered in a particular party in order to be deemed eligible.
So we would expect some independents and maybe even a few Republicans to go into the Democratic primary, and that would reduce, I would think, the number of African Americans in the Democrat sample.
So there was this kind of mini kerfuffle about some Republican leaders encouraging Republican voters in the state to go vote for Bernie Sanders. The thinking, at least on the Republican side, being he's a candidate who won't do as well against Donald
disruption.
Trump.
We've heard that for both polls and elections.
So do we account for that, or do pollsters account for that? when we're looking at the likely voters, the likely voter model? Do we account for the fact that Republicans may jump in?
Absolutely, absolutely, because we're asking everybody the likelihood that they will participate, and we have questions which relate to that. So we ask their interest, we ask whether they have voted in the past, and we also ask if they are likely to vote this time.
Yeah, and I think to Jay's point here, in our most recent likely voter model of the Democratic primary in South Carolina, Democrats comprised 59% of that grouping. Independents were 36%. We had 4% Republicans who were saying, "Hey, I'm going to try this out." Doesn't mean they're all going to, go for Bernie and
Right.
follow that dictum, but at least the model picks up those folks, and whoever's eligible has to get a chance to get in the poll.
Perhaps what will be more telling this time in South Carolina is the proportion of independents, because last time in 2016 they had a choice too of whether to vote Republican or Democrat, and so if they are interested in voting, and those are people that do tend to kind of be on the fence, depending upon the candidates who are running, there may be a larger proportion, and that's something of independence in this primary on Saturday.
So one of the things we did when we were in the field with this, the Nevada debate happened in the middle while we were in the field, and I love this as a political journalist. I love being able to say what happened before and after an event, right? Everybody loves that, right? So we were able to do that. What was the difference? Now remember, this is the Nevada debate, not the food fight in Charleston debate. Just a couple days ago. What was the difference? What was the difference maker of that Nevada debate?
Well, are in the polls?
In the poll, yeah. What did we see?
It's really tough, and there are actually a number of South Carolina polls that are out, and were out this week. And I don't know, is crap a technical term?
Oh, wow.
Yes, it's scientific, I'm sure. Yes.
No, but the difficulty here is, and we talk methodology, that's what we do here.
Right.
And it is disappointing. Let me just clarify one poll that was out this week, which is the Monmouth University poll. And that is a terrific poll, and we love the poll. We're a fan of Patrick Murray, and he does serious scientific research. And also he's totally transparent about, what he does and his methods and all the statistics behind the numbers. Never difficulty finding, the proportion of Democrats, Republicans, and independents, and all sorts of the nitty-gritty things we like to dive deep in.
And they were in the field not before this South Carolina debate,
but
right up to it.
Yeah, the 23rd and the 24th.
And he has Biden with a pretty big lead.
He does.
Yep.
He does. And so it looks as though people, thought that Biden may be coming off the canvas for South Carolina. It is interesting. He has a very similar proportion of African Americans in his survey as we did. Also,
fewer than typically is the
yes,
case. So that would be in keeping with what we expect.
That's absolutely
not enormously. I mean, I don't want to.
So, but that's the dilution of independents voting,
and so a bit, yes, and but also he has Biden doing very well among African Americans, and I think a bit more than we did as well, which makes sense after Nevada, and also the campaign's now in full swing in South Carolina, where they had been kind of on the side, just as all of us, in other states have been. So the campaign has certainly come to South Carolina, and Biden looks to be. Have that firewall that he is hoping for.
Which he desperately has to have.
Now,
at this
the
point.
other polls, there have been a number of other polls, and I don't really know what to say about them.
Well, you just said a few things. Just a moment.
CRAP says something about them.
But the thing is, they do show very similar results to what the Monmouth poll has shown. There's one, I think, just out today, which showed it a bit closer. But that's the Post and Courier with Change Research. But again, these are all methodologies that are untested, without really track records. you don't really know what to say because scientifically and statistically, you can't make an assessment. So the Post and Courier with Change Research poll shows Biden with a 4-point lead, and that's the narrowest, actually. Even though it's the most recent, it is the narrowest. There's one from East Carolina University, which shows an 8-point Biden lead, and a PPP survey, which shows a 15-point Biden lead. But in each of these cases, these polls are not gold standard polls in the sense they use interactive voice response
and that's where
online.
I read that
mixed,
about
or mixed mode where there's phone calls, there's online, there's this, and just
I don't think any of these used phone calls. They were all interactive voice response and online surveys.
Right. I just want to real quick. This isn't us tooting our own horn. I mean, you can look at like Nate Silver over at 538. He rates pollsters, right, and polling organizations, and he gave us an A+. Great, gave Monmouth an A+, I believe, right? I mean, so there are some high quality polls. The polls that we're looking at here in South Carolina are either unrated by him or have gotten some pretty bad grades. So it's not us kind of saying this.
And one of them, I
feel, is a third party.
Yeah. Well, but also, so let me take the Post and Courier with Change Research poll. Okay, so they use targeted online ads to point to an online survey. Jay? You can actually speak to that because that is a methodology that we tested.
Yeah, I mean, so that when you're going and asking people to come to your poll through advertising, we did some testing with that back in the Alabama special election, and then we did it again in a Pennsylvania House special election. And the results were wide of the mark by a wide margin. And methodologically, it's pretty clear. You're not reaching a representative sample. You could. I mean, it could happen. A stopped clock is right twice a day, but you're not going to have any certainty that you're going to reach an audience that is representative in that case. So
if you drill down into their methodology, which is great because it was actually really easy to find, and we should
kudos
tip a
for
hat.
Transparency.
Absolutely. But I love the point where they say that these types of sample reflect the demographics of the population, and then go on to say, but post-stratification by age, gender, ethnicity, education, 2016 vote, which always, every time, any time a pollster uses a previous election to balance
ding, ding, ding.
to balance
the bell
their survey,
goes off.
I go wild, and geography. So yes, we do sample balancing, but our surveys come in very close to population, and it's response rates and kind of shadings that we are balancing too.
The one thing also I saw and I'm not sure which of the polls it was, and maybe you recall this, but one of them talked about it being an IVR poll and all that, and they talked about how they were sort of calling people automated style, and that means that's a landline only poll.
Yeah.
So you're not even getting cell phones. Hello.
Well, then
you
they
can't
add
get a good sample
online.
that way.
They add online, but I think it's it's an erroneous assumption to say that if you're online, you have a cell phone, or that somehow you're getting a similar demographic.
So what we're really just saying is as we've said over and over and over, buyer beware. Don't look at the average. Don't look at that RCP average or even the 538 average and go, oh, well, that's got to be right. There is a whole mixed bag of polls that are in those averages.
This was a tough group. It was kind of disappointing.
But look at the gold standard polls. Monmouth's in there. We're in there. Other pollsters with good track record. ABC Washington Post is in there, right?
Yeah.
There's good people in there.
Well, if for us going back, that is a week and a half, and that's another lifetime in technology, in technology and in polling. So certainly, I'm hopeful there'll be some trackings, particularly as we're going into Super Tuesday states.
Right.
There'll be some trackings that will be able to take a take a look at what's going on, getting a little bit closer, and it kind of gives you a flavor, but you don't want to bet the house on it.
So before we, I want to talk about Super Tuesday briefly on the debate, though, because we should say something about the debate, the South Carolina debate.
The NBC poll got a shout out.
Yeah,
they were happy. We were happy.
We were happy.
So Lee, you've watched lots of debates. I know that Barb and I have a similar situation. We watch the first hour and either fall asleep or turn it off in many cases. You made it through, though?
Yes, I do. And I even made it through some of the post-debate analysis, so I'm not quite sure why.
Did this help anybody other than, say, Donald Trump, who, Democrats seem to think is the most helped by these debates?
No, I mean, I think, people got their first look at Michael Bloomberg. And I think that
their second look.
The second look in South Carolina. The first look was Nevada.
This is the South Carolina.
But
food fight.
Yeah, and I think,
and he's not on the ballot.
No, he's not on the ballot. But he's coming up
in South
real
Carolina.
Soon. I mean,
we're going to talk about Super Tuesday next.
And he's sort of like the 800-pound elephant, because we're seeing him all over TV, and soon that shows up. Does anybody get help by the? I think to some degree Sanders sort of did what Sanders does. He took a little more incoming because he is the alleged front runner.
A lot more incoming.
A lot more incoming. There was still Elizabeth Warren was still going after Bloomberg.
Bloomberg instead of Bernie.
Yeah, and that was sort of funny to me because, you tend to go after the person who's competing with you for votes.
Yeah.
And I thought people generally, sort of did what they needed to do or wanted to do, and I don't think it was a great switch, except I think Joe Biden is sort of like getting a better rhythm and maybe off the canvas, as we're saying.
So what does this mean for Super Tuesday? Because there's no time. There's no time in between.
Yeah.
Saturday,
so you can't
the
raise
results
money.
are in at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. We're going to know who wins South Carolina. Tuesday, what is it, a quarter of the delegates are awarded, something like that?
It's a third.
A third of the delegates are awarded on Tuesday. Mike Bloomberg's on the ballot now. He hasn't been on the ballot in any of these. This just seems like the story that we've been playing with here is just the bulldozer comes through and the story changes.
So far, believe it or not, only 3% of the delegates have been selected. So, I mean, think of all the coverage for what is just so minuscule in terms of the actual number of delegates.
And people have also already been voting in many of these places. So it's not like...
Right, in California, they're saying that 40 to 50% of the vote, maybe more, is already in.
And that's great because... probably most of the polling for Super Tuesday has already been done as well, and won't include the results of South Carolina because Super Tuesday is going to come right up on the heels of South Carolina, for better or worse, for Joe Biden.
Yeah, and campaigns can't raise money in time, and they have to already done their TV buys. So you really kind of have one chapter coming to a close with South Carolina, and then a whole new chapter opening up.
So pretty much we know what we are going to know going into Super Tuesday. But Lee, you had another issue that you wanted to bring up today, just regarding poll methodology, and you had an interesting observation about some national polls that came out.
And just a quick hit here, and it's coming off of the comment by Scott Clement, who tweeted, he's with the Washington Post, and he put together a little tweet there, and I thought it was very interesting. So kudos to him. We talk a lot about polls.
Well, here's the tweet. So we should tell people what the tweet is. 3 national cell landline polls this week provided estimates of primary support with black Democrats. Post ABC, Biden 31, Sanders 28. NPR PBS Marist, hey, that's us. Biden 31, Sanders 28. Does that sound familiar? NBC Wall Street Journal, Biden 31, Sanders 29. Together shows big shift versus January when 48% backed Biden in the post-Ipsos.
Point being that we talk a lot about inconsistency in polls, and we've talked about that today. Well, here you've got 3 polls using very similar methodologies. There are some variations in them, but they are all doing live interviewer, landline, cell phone, reaching out to folks, and look at that consistency in what they're finding.
And it's not as big a mystery.
No, it's not. It becomes mysterious, and the electorate looks so more volatile than it probably is when you have lots of different polls of varying quality.
I was going to make that point too, is that very often when we see polls bouncing around, even if they've been even if the data collection has been done during the same time, and these South Carolina polls are a case in point, people then say, oh, well, voters must be, bouncing around, and they haven't made up their mind. And
in some cases that's true, but we find that in the undecided, very large
exactly,
undecided
yeah,
numbers.
or persuadable voters.
Yeah, persuadables.
Our South Carolina numbers had 27% saying they were
right.
Yes,
still up in
and
the
things
air.
can change. We've seen that. Debates matter.
Yep.
Certainly, voting matters significantly from state to state. But if you have the same methodology that is, pretty similar during the same time, you're going to pretty much come up and find the same time. So just one last question. So what is Bernie Sanders going to do on Super Tuesday? Is he gonna clean up, or is Biden going to continue?
I think and this is based on just intuition, not any polls, but I think that Bernie Sanders could come away with a plurality advantage among delegates, but he's not going to run up the score like he looked like he might have a week ago.
And Jay, how about former Mayor Bloomberg?
I think he probably does better than, well, we've never seen him. So first off, he hasn't been on the ballot. So better than how he's done means he gets anything. I think that those ads have made a difference. In the states they've been running in. There are very few polls in California. I mean, it is a paucity of polls there, especially good ones. We don't know
it's a tough place.
We don't know what's happening there.
Lots of languages.
We don't know really what's happening in Texas yet. We don't know about these states, and I think Mike Bloomberg is probably pretty persuasive with those ads. When most voters in those states have not paid all that much attention yet, and all of a sudden it's going to turn to them. All of a sudden the focus is going to be on them with 2 or 3 days or 1 or 2 days, and I think that benefits somebody like a Mike Bloomberg. Yes, Lee, your hand is up.
Yeah, I feel like I'm watching the Democratic debate.
I was doing that intentionally because as we're watching these debates, sometimes it kind of looks silly when they're all waving around, get me in. So I figured I had one more point I wanted to say. I figured I'd wave my hand just like they do.
Should we talk over you then? Yeah. Then it'll really be like the debate.
No, I don't. I was just going to say, watch out for some candidates who don't get many delegates because they don't get the 15% threshold, and therefore, if this is the last word on the podcast today, it may be the last event for them also.
Well, that will do it for this edition of Poll Hub. We let Lee get the last word.
Every time.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Thank you, Mary Griffith, our executive producer, and Casey Schaff, our editor. And thank you, a special thanks to Jay today, who is
manning the boards.
Manning the controls.
It's like my old radio days from when I was in college. It's like, I remember all this.
Well, if I get the last word, I'm not talking about the Roper Center.
Oh, do you want me to do it so you can get the last word?
Absolutely.
Okay. To keep it consistent, we'll do that. Thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University for providing us with the ability to look back at survey questions and talk about the results over time. We love trend data. We think it says an awful lot about polling. If you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. And one quick thing. We talk a lot about the Marist Poll Academy. A lot of what we talked about today, especially about field dates, is something that is in the Academy. It's an online learning experience. It's free, and there's links in the show notes. But one of the things about field dates is we've just done a case study about field dates. You should really take a look at it, and we'll let Lee have the last word about it.
Subscribe to everything we do. Okay. That's the last word.
Okay.
You can do it on Poll Up. You consider, you can put a review. You can do it on your podcast application of choice. And I think we're coming to a grinding end here. So
thanks so much, Lee. But why don't you tell everybody that we're going to see them next time?
It sounds like some of us may be allowed to come back next time. See you then.